Welcome to another outdoor edition of Church in the Basement. My name is Pastor Joe, and it's good to be able to share these messages with you. I hope on this Canada Day long weekend that you have found reason to get out of your homes and to enjoy the beauty of creation and the blessedness of the nation that we live in. I pray that you also, in the midst of getting out of your homes, are taking intentional efforts to be courteous to those around you, blessing them and building them up with warm smiles and helpful, edifying conversation. May you be a blessing as you live out your life in company with others. God's peace be with you now and always. There is a basic drama that takes place in all of our lives. I know that if I reflect on my own life story, I see this drama replaying itself over and over and over again through each and every stage of life, and sometimes each and every day of life. It's this drama that comes along with a battle of the wills, when your will is pitted against the will of another. We see this dramatically playing itself out in the world around us today, especially as we struggle to succumb to the will of social well-being and social responsibility as we seek to care for one another and for ourselves in the world of a global pandemic, where we have to bend our own will to the inconveniences of wearing a mask from time to time, or taking special effort to hand sanitize before going into places, or to line up so that we don't push the capacity of one building or space over what it's intended to take on in a space where we are to keep our distance from one another so as not to pass the bad germs, as I say with my children. It's a battle of the wills. It's a dramatic thing that plays out. And if you're a teenager, you know what this is like because your will is often doing battle with your parents. If you're a parent, your will is often doing battle with your children. And those things never change. At the workplace, it plays out in a similar way between employee and employer. In leadership roles, it plays out between those who are striving to lead and those who are expected to follow. In other arenas of life, it takes place in different ways and forms, but at the end of the day, it always comes back to being a basic battle of the will. Your will versus another. Your will versus social responsibility. Your will versus the well-being of a system, your will versus that of your parents, your will versus another. I could say it a few more times, but I think you're starting to get the point, and probably already starting to remember some stories from your own life when you can imagine where your will is doing battle with another. When you struggle to submit or to surrender to that other person, when you struggle to meet in the middle ground and find a way forward. This is not an uncommon thing, and in fact, if you reread the story of Israel as it's told in the context of God's relationship with them, they are constantly at battle with God's will for their lives. From the beginning of creation, God's people have struggled to just be obedient to His will for them. They've always had an opinion, a strong mind about how to proceed. And so when God tells them, hey, this is the best way forward, they say, maybe I can do better. Does this sound familiar to you in your life or to your life with someone else? I know it is in mine. It should be then no surprise that when you get here in the Gospel of Mark, it's repeated again in Luke and in Matthew's Gospels as well. But here in Mark chapter 12, verse 13 to 17, we read a story of the battle of wills. For we in the New Testament see this sort of tension, political tension, between the ruling Herodians, the Roman Empire, and those in charge at the time, and the Jewish community living in Israel, the Judeans, and how they're responding to the Herodians. One is an oppressive rule, and the other is trying to squeeze out from under those rules, living into their own expectation and will, their own kingdom and the rules that come with it. And so we read here in Mark chapter 12 that the Herodians and the Pharisees have teamed up for an encounter with Jesus. They send some Pharisees and Herodians It's a hard word to say. Some Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They come to him and they say, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity, that you aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are or what their status is, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth, his word above all," it might as well say. And so then they ask this question: is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay it or shouldn't we? Now, before I read to you Jesus' answer, you need to realize that this is a politically charged question. It is a question that is weighty, and if Jesus answers it wrong to the Herodians, well, it's his life on the line. And if he answers it wrong to the Judeans, to the Pharisees, well, he is in trouble there too. Making, in their mind, a compromise to what God's word teaches about following God's will versus Herod's will. You can appreciate then the challenge of the battle of the wills here. Is Jesus going to answer to the will of the Roman Empire? Is he going to answer to the will of the Jewish community and the Old Testament laws that they have built up into their kingdom? Or is he going to live into his Father's will that seems much bigger and grander than any of our own man-imagined kingdoms could be? Well, I think you get the answer by my tone already, but let me read it to you just in case you don't believe me. Jesus knows their hypocrisy and sort of the corruption of this question. And he says, "Why are you trying to trap me?" He said. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." It's a silver coin, different than all the other currency of the day. And on one side is the face of Caesar himself, and on the other side is a female portrait, a depiction of Roman peace and prosperity. It's a special tax given only to those who have participated in the census, only to those who are being counted and expected to contribute to Rome's peace and prosperity. It's an imperial tax, and to the Jewish mind, it's a loyalty piece, and to the Roman line, it's a submission piece, and to Jesus' mind, well, let's read. They bring him the coin, and they asked him whose image. They bring him the coin, and he asks them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, probably flipping the coin back toward them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and God what is God's." And they were amazed at him. You see, Jesus' view of these kinds of things that our wills do battle over is so much bigger than we ever see them. We see them as these monumental things, and we trip over them all the time. We draw lines in the sands and dig in our heels, and yet Jesus flips this coin that those people would have been spending their lives to give value to. And he says, "Wow, it's Caesar's. His face is on it." And he gives it back. If you want to be obedient to the truth that's taught in here, if you want to follow God's will for your life, you can't be preoccupied about collecting or giving coins that belong to Caesar. You need to be oriented toward giving God what is God's. And the assumption here, as it's written throughout the text, as it draws back or looks back at the Old Testament, is the basic summary of the law, that you are to give God everything. You are to love him and love your neighbor. You are to live your life in a way that surrenders your will to his, that you love him with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, that you give him everything that he has asked for, and you do so freely, that you allow his will to become your will so that your will is his will. I share this with you on a Canada Day long weekend because I want to say thank you to our Canadian leadership for the work that they have done for us before this pandemic, that they are doing in the midst of it, and that I trust they will continue to do after. I want to thank those that work on the front lines for the hard work that they do and their diligence in adapting rapidly throughout all of this. I want to thank the grocers and those the many staff that have lined up at the tills to help check out people as they've dealt with the stress. I want to thank everybody who has played their part in adding to the peace and prosperity of Canada in the midst of a tumultuous season. I want to thank those globally who have played their parts well, that we can look past the differences and allow our wills to work together on this. But for those of you who are living out a life of faith and striving to find a place in which you can allow God's will for your life rule over all other wills for your life, I want to remind you that in these moments of beyond crisis, when we're more likely to trip over these lines in the sand, that you're invited to act and respond as Jesus does, that you are encouraged to allow his will to overcome those others. It's a will that holds on to lightly those things that we spend so much time trying to build up or live into. As we look to opening up churches a little bit more and finding more meaningful expressions of worship together, as we struggle to navigate our faith in the midst of all of the restrictions placed on us, remember just how lightly God holds on to so many of these finer details, because at the end of the day, his one priority for us is that we love him and love our neighbors above all. So in a season where you're frustrated by the things that are restricting you, when it feels like your freedoms are being infringed upon, just toss those coins back to those that are giving them to you, and give back to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and focus on giving God what is God's. Focus on giving yourself each and every day to the faith that he has called you to. Focus on giving yourself back to him, so that you might live as fully as God has called you to. And in that moment, trust and know that his love is more than enough. Stick around at the end of this. Either stick around or skip ahead, whatever you choose, but we have a poolside blessing for you, and I pray that it encourages your spirit as much as it made me smile and encouraged my spirit in recording it. Peace and blessings to each of you as you live out God's will for your lives and struggle to let your will be his.
Water you turn into wine. Open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. There's none like you. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. There's not like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. You turned into wine. Open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. There's not like you. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. There's not like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is for us, then what could stand against? What could stand against? What could stand against? What could stand against? Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? If our God is with us, what could stand against? What could stand against?